Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to this evening's webinar on Finish or Feed On, the third webinar in a series of 6 webinars taking place over the next 7 weeks on farmersjournal.ie. I'd just like to thank our sponsors, AXA Insurance and Chanel Animal Health. Also, guys, as ever, we want your participation, your concerns, your questions, your comments, your views. To email us at webinar@farmersjournal.ie or WhatsApp us on 086 836 6465. First up, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to be joined by Adam Woods, our beef and suckler editor, our markets intelligence specialist, Phelim O'Neill, our livestock specialist, our Declan Myrne, and later on in the show, we'll also be joined by our policy analyst, Anne Finnegan. Adam, up to you first. Take us through what's happening in the cattle trade this week.
Yeah, Justin, look, it's been a dream start, I think, to 2022 in terms of prices. I've often done webinars with you, and maybe there'll be a lot of giving out as in relation to, I suppose, where we are with beef price, but definitely it's been really positive.
I would like to class it as robust debate rather than giving out, Adam.
Yeah, well, look at it whatever way you want yourself, but yeah, it's been a good start, I guess. We would have looked at this back last October, Justin, in the Farmers Journal in terms of looking at budgets for winter finishing, and we would have said we needed to be somewhere north of €5 to be breaking even, and I guess that's where we're coming to now. I don't think it's going to stop there. I think it's going to keep going. We'll probably call a spade across the board. We're probably 450 there for bullocks, maybe a little bit lower down the south. Donegal has really set the pace. Foil Meats in Donegal has really set the pace in the northern half of the country. They've been canvassing for cattle hard. That's taking cattle off the other, we'll say, big 3 players, and they've had to raise their game then to not let cattle, I suppose, move to Donegal. Donegal always had to be out in front as regards beef price, because they're out there on a limb in the northwest, I guess, and they have to pay to get cattle up there. But that's really lifted everybody else, especially in the northern half. And in the southern half, maybe they've been able to drag their feet a little bit more, but definitely this week we've seen a change again. And as I said, 450 for bullocks, 455 for heifers. Bulls, on the 24-month bulls, you're up at sort of 465 of a base or whatever, and then the younger bulls 445 plus 12. And just in terms of comparing, I guess, to last year, Justin, in relation to where we're at, if I was sitting with you here this week last year, we were talking about a base of 370 for bullocks, a base of 375 for heifers. We're sort of around 380 for bulls, those sort of under 24-month bulls, and we were back at 365 for that under 16-month bulls. So we're somewhere between sort of 250 and 350 euros up on that animal in terms of that finished animal if we average carcass weights across the board. Now remember, I guess, input prices as well are up, and if we look at, I guess, a ton of meal, we're up €100 ahead. If we look at fertilizer, we're up 500 a ton, and if you look at diesel, I suppose you're up 300 on a fill of 1,000 litres of diesel. But definitely as regards trade, really positive. Cow trade is exceptionally positive at the moment. A real drive for manufacturing beef. We're seeing the return to food service. We've seen this for a couple of months, but it seems to be getting stronger and stronger as regards food service trade, especially on the continent. That's really driving cow trade, and obviously we've always been very good for cows, I guess, here in terms of paying maybe top dollar for cows, and we're definitely seeing that 440 at the moment, top of the pile there as regards you grade
for cows.
That's a specialist sort of a manufacturing trade or a food service trade in terms of outfit. It's an independent factory, but yeah, 440 to get cows, and even for O's and maybe a mix of O's and P's, we're up there at €4 well finished cows, and you're back there probably at 380, 85 for P's. But yeah, cows has been, if we look at cows between this time last year and this year, Justin, we're probably up €1. So that's, again, on a 300 kilo carcass, that's €300.
Certainly no excuses for keeping hangers on around this year, Adam. This is the year to cash them in, is it?
Absolutely not. I think we're seeing a little, we'll say, as a result of that, we'll just look at the figures for tomorrow's paper, and we're up 19,000 head on 2021 figures. So we've 19,000 cattle killed already. Now, Borby estimate will be up 80,000, but that's good news that we're up so far so early, because that'll take the pressure off maybe in terms of the back end of the year. There's a lot of talk there about the UK going to recover maybe in terms of numbers towards the second half of the year, and we'll probably recover here as well. But if we have a lot of those animals taken out early on, it's very, very positive for the beef trade.
But Adam, I get the sense that numbers really isn't the issue. Like, as you say, we've killed next to 19,000 cattle. The kill is relatively strong, and the prices are up. I get the sense, and we'll come to Phelim on this later on, but there's a bloody good trade out there for beef, and I don't get the sense that factories are hurting too much paying these prices, that they're able to get these higher prices out of the market, which ultimately is good for farmers because there's more of a chance then of them being sustained.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I guess if we look to the UK, we're down 12%. In terms of slaughtering animals in 2022 compared to the same period in 2021. That's created a huge hole over there, and we're filling that hole, and our factories here are able to fill that hole. They're in a good position to fill it, and they're able to pay for beef to go into that. Another important aspect is within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll see factories start to kill for Easter. Easter this year is sort of around that 10th of April, I think, or the 12th of April. They'll start to kill for Easter from probably next week, or sorry, the 16th of March on, or maybe the week after, maybe in terms of, but that's not that far away. It's only 2 or 3 weeks away. So that's going to give us another good drive, I guess, for demand, because we always see a lift around Easter. We see a lot of promotions going on in supermarkets, and I guess factories will start to kill for that now around the 16th of March.
Would you have any concerns, Adam, that, and we're going to talk about the economics of this a bit later on, but with fertilizer prices higher, guys might think that 580, maybe 600 kilo bullock that I cut back on the fertilizer this year, I'll turn a few less out to grass, and you might see a bit of a surge of cattle coming onto the market in March and April. I know the March wouldn't indicate that, but have you any concern there?
I don't think so, Justin. If we look at the last week, we're down 1,000 head on the week before, and a lot of that was maybe made up of bulls. We'll say bullocks and heifers is back about 200 or whatever. So I don't think you're going to see a huge. Now there is some of that, all right, that some people are making the choice to, rather than go back to grass, and look at all the cattle that has been bought in the last 6 weeks as regards March. The 600 kilo, we'll say, plus animal, that's going into a shed and that's going on to be fed. A lot of factories aligning, we'll say, feedlot buyers and larger finishers aligning them to themselves to buy that 600 kilo plus, because factories see April and May as a real crunch time for supplies. They've been saying that for the last 6 months, and they've been trying to line up. And I guess we're seeing, as a function of winter finishing not working for the last God knows how long, 10 years, a lot of those smaller players are gone. They haven't done it because they've seen them.
They're going to the mark.
Yes, yes.
You take a guy now with a 600, looking at your figures there last week and this week in the Farmers Journal, like those 600 kilo cattle, or albeit the upper end, are coming into 1,800 euros. It'd be a brave man to start and put a ton of meal into those animals. Maybe you wouldn't need the full ton, but certainly pumping more money into them. Are those guys getting out at that price, and maybe the specialised finishers that can negotiate a bit harder picking those up?
Yeah, but those specialised finishers have to be just on 20, 30, 40 cent ahead of where the beef price is at the moment to be getting out. If you're paying €3 a kilo for a 600 kilo animal, putting them into the shed at this day of the year, meal heading for maybe 340, 350 a ton, it's going to be, you're going to need a huge premium on that. But factories appear at the moment to be quite comfortable to sit down with those farmers and make sure that they're going to pay for them in April and May. And April and May definitely seems to be a crunch time coming ahead.
It's €5 a kilo, the new 90 pence a pound, Adam?
Yeah, well, it is for the next 6 months anyway. I've heard of flat deals this week, Justin. €5 and 5 cents for Aberdeen Angus and Hereford heifers this week. And look, we'll probably talk about it later, but very frustrating to see. I was talking to a guy today, and look, it's great maybe to see it, but 560 kilo bullocks today, dead, over 30 months, 4 pluses, and he's getting all the bells and whistles as regard price on those bullocks, and yet in 2 years' time, we'll see MII will roll out that polystyrene tray again and say, we need carcasses at 380 kilos. We can't sell this. We've huge issues. This isn't our strength. And it's really, I suppose, at the moment, it just really shows you it's all about supply and demand. And when factories want cattle,
I've no doubt Phelim O'Neill will have all the answers for us.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll touch on that later. Yeah.
Adam, I see also, just flicking through the journal there this evening, there's bonuses going. There's ABP and Keypack for Angus cattle are offering a 30 cent a kilo bonus on top of the base price and the QA payment for Angus's from April on.
Yeah, so this is the Certified Irish Angus group. Applications actually closed for that at the weekend, but that's where you book in your cattle with that group, and will say issue a 30 cent bonus then on top. That's an increase in the bonus of what's currently available. You're probably talking 25 cent across the board at the moment for those Anguses. And look, we're in an exceptional year. At some stages during the year, that's as low as 20 cent, but that's 30 cent guaranteed, I think, from the 16th of March until about the middle of May or the end of May. So yeah, look at it. It's a really attractive bonus, and look at anybody anybody that's finishing Angus cattle should be availing of that, I suppose, extra bonus.
Is that closed now, Adam? Is that actually closed?
It's actually closing. It's actually closing at the weekend, Justin. So people, the power of that group is that you book your cattle in advance and you book them in through that group, and then factories have foresight of what's coming. But that you will say you get that bonus. Then in return of having that foresight, you get that bonus of 30 cent.
Adam, you mentioned bulls, and we're going to get into a bit of a debate on bulls now with Declan, and certainly some of the work he has been showing in the journal around the environmental efficiency of bulls. You were down in Tullamore Farm earlier this week, and you caught up with Sean.
Yeah, well, I guess we're there with bulls in Tullamore. We've chosen to stick with bulls, and we just got a bit of an update from Sean as regards what's happening at the moment and how we're managing the bull system on Tullamore Farm.
Okay, lads, let's shoot down to Tullamore Farm.
Okay, Sean, we're here in the bull shed in Tullamore Farm. Tell me a little bit about performance for 2021 and into 2022 and how it's been going for the last couple of months.
Yeah, the bulls are, they're moving along nicely there now. They've been doing at the last weigh-in, they were doing 1.54 kgs a day since their last weigh-in, which is really good. Our Semental bulls are probably coming in the heaviest there. They're coming in up over 530 kilos, and then I suppose followed by the Chardies then, and the Limousines, and then the Solaires are coming in probably the lightest, but probably the latest born as well. So we have 29 bulls in this pen all feeding together. They're the heaviest, and we have 8 smaller bulls that were born later in the year, and we're feeding them separate.
And in terms of health treatments since they have come indoors, just go through what has happened them since they came inside here on the farm.
Well, first things, they would have been received their pneumonia booster before they came in, and then they would have been wormed 4 weeks after they came in and treated for lice, and we shaved their backs as well. And that pretty much just sums it up. We had to treat them a second time for lice, and we gave them a fluke drench as well.
And you've had no issues as regards pneumonia or any, we'll say, issues with dung or anything like that? Everything's been going pretty smooth?
No, since they come in, the bulls haven't taken a setback at all. We've had no sickness, no real problems at all to report.
So then moving on to nutrition, tell me a little bit about, I suppose, the silage quality that goes into these bulls, what they started out on, and what to bring us up to today as to what they're eating now.
Yeah, they're on the first cut silage, which is coming in there at 74% DMD. It's pretty good quality stuff, and they're also getting, they're on 7.5 kgs of a 16% weaning ration as well. We would have started them on 2 kgs when they come in and built it up over the course of the 2 or 3 months up to 7.5 kgs, and now we'll be looking to build that on to 8 kilos and up to 10 by the start of March.
I suppose we talked about it there just earlier on about the extra costs associated with finishing animals this year, and you're looking at your finishing ration last year, I think it was around the 250 mark. Finishing ration this year is up at 310, so that's €60 a tonne extra, and these bulls are on 10 kilos a day, so that's 60 cent. Would say a day extra in terms of the feeding costs of the bulls this year. So that means at the end of this, you're going to need a higher beef price to get out.
Yeah, and look, we're looking at beef price probably being up on what it was last year, but then again, all our input costs are up as well. So we really need price to drive on in order for these to be, profitable.
Just finally, in terms of bulls, look, there's been a lot of talk again about bulls over the last couple of weeks around, I guess, the potential there is in a bull system to reduce the carbon footprint. It's going to be bulls on Tullamore Farm, isn't it? Like, we looked at bulls here last year, we looked at going to steers, but really for you, this system here is the system for Tullamore Farm.
Yeah, for this farm, I suppose it can't be bet on, number one, on performance of the stock in terms of what they're eating, and they're actually turning that back into kilos of carcass. And as well, it really streamlines the system. We're quite highly stocked here in the summertime during the grazing season, so we couldn't really look at a steer system, because if we were to let back out 40 or 45 steers, our cow numbers are going to have to drop, and then again production would be down as well. So bulls are really streamlined and really suit this system here, and I think in a lot of suckler systems under 16-month bulls really suit, because we don't have the worry of letting bulls or strong cattle back out to grass.
And in terms of speaking to the factory that we're going to these bulls with, they haven't had an issue, in fairness, in the past with taking these bulls. Once they're done well, they hit the carcass weights required and they hit the fat score required. Yeah, no, look, he's been good to us since since we started here. They've no issue taking bulls. They seem to have a market for it. We're dealing through Keepack, and they seem to have a market for bulls, and he's taking them. But again, look, you have to be conscious of getting bulls away at the right spec. You need them in at 2+ to 3+ if you can. And again, look, he's probably not over keen on over heavy bulls, and that's why maybe they're more of a demand for under 16 months rather than over 16-month bulls.
seem to have more fun at the end of that video, Adam, than you had during it. Adam, before I go to Declan, and it's very easy to jump up and down about the bulls and talk about factories should be doing more bulls and X, Y, and Z, but I think Sean hit on an important point there. Not all, just because it's a bull doesn't mean it's a bull. In Tullamore Farm, Sean has got very good at selecting bulls at the right weight, at the right age, and within spec. I've often seen him going there with 2 or 3 bulls, 4 bulls, rather than waiting to maybe there's a load ready. And is that the secret to bulls? And is that part of the problem of bulls in the same time that rocking up with young bulls at 22 months at 500 kilos, whatnot, is not what a young bull beef system is? And is there an education job there to be done in terms of really defining what a young bull actually is?
You're probably right, Justin. I suppose we killed 4,000 bulls last week in this country. A lot of those are probably, been done really, really well in terms of spec and in terms of carcass weight and in terms of fat cover and in terms of conformation. The problem arose, I guess, when everybody got into bulls and everybody tried to jump on the back of the bandwagon, and we got bulls very heavy and we got bulls underfleshed and we got bulls not doing well. But I guess it's still frustrating, though, from a suckler point of view, to be told, look, I sit on the beef stakeholders group in Grange and Teagasc, and at the last meeting we had, factories were very vocal around that table in relation to bulls, not wanting more bulls. And I guess if you're looking at the genetics that we have on that farm in Tullamore, or any farm, any suckler farm that's capable of doing very high weight gains, and we're capable of getting fat covered on those bulls at that age through the correct diet and through good performance, and yet factories will tell us, look, I know they're taking them off us in Tullamore, but they're still saying we don't want a lot more here, lads. And look, if we look at it, Declan looked at the Teagasc work there in relation to carbon footprint. We've a huge, tool available to us here to work with. But yet factories don't want to take them on board, and whether it's a sickening or a stinging from that 13 or 14 job, I don't know. But and there's maybe Phil knows more about this, but in relation to the background of the manufacturing beef trade, the way I understand it would be that you would possibly get a better market for bulls at the moment, given that where our markets are going in relation to manufacturing beef, that forequarter.
That's the frustration, Adam. Like, from an output point of view, it'd be basically like a dairy farmer or dairy co-op coming out and telling the dairy farmer not to put a cluster in one of the teats when milking the cows. But so there's that productivity frustration. But Declan, there's also the huge frustration out there, and we got a huge reaction to it in relation to the work you did a few weeks ago in relation to showing the environmental footprint of these young bull beef systems versus the older steer beef systems. Just remind people what you found.
Yeah, Justin. So it may come as a shock. I know didn't expect it to be as big a difference myself. I knew production efficiencies, yes, were there, but when you see the environmental efficiencies, that a 19-month young bull compared to a 24-month steer at slaughter could be up to 32-33% more efficient in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or greenhouse gas equivalent, CO2 equivalent. So when you look at, say, a 19-month bull slaughtered, the CO2 equivalence per kilo of carcass comes in about 9.9 kilos, whereas if you look at a 24-month steer, that's up to 14.6 kilos for every kilo of carcass. So huge differences there. That they're too big for us to try and to ignore. We're being told we need to, there's big focus currently on reducing slaughter age of steers. So trying to pull back the average age of slaughter on a steer system. For every 1 month, again, Teagasc research will show for every 1 month that we can pull back the age of slaughter, you reduce the emissions by about 3.6%. Here's something that can do 10 times that just by not castrating. So huge possibilities there. Again, as you said, it's not for everyone. A bull beef system is a specialized system. But, as Adam said, in 2013, maybe, is it 3 out of every 10 animals of young males were being slaughtered as young bulls. Maybe we don't go back to that level, but definitely there has to be a greater opportunity for young bulls to come in there in specialized systems on farms that know what they're doing. The systems are there, and there's a learning curve to bulls. And yes, there is also greater risk with bulls, but for the efficiencies that can be achieved, I think it's just too good to ignore.
So, Phelim, explain this to me. Try and round this square in terms of Adam is telling us that the production efficiencies. Declan is telling us the environmental efficiencies. We keep getting diktats sent down to farmers from retailers and processors talking about sustainability and environmental sustainability. Here we have a tool on the farm that we don't need to depend on any other part of the supply chain. It could be turned on overnight. There'll be a lot of farmers out there that look to do it, and it will deliver a huge gain in terms of environmental efficiency. And yet our retailers, our processors are telling us, actually, that's not what the consumer wants. And yet farmers, on the other hand, have been forced to invest millions of euros in adopting new technologies, because on the other hand, we're being told that this is a strategic importance in terms of reduce methane or to reduce emissions from agriculture. What's not been joined up here?
Right, Justin. Look, it's a very, very fair point, and it's a debate that has to take place, and it certainly hasn't taken place so far. Traditionally, this country, with our grass-based system, a steer beef system was what was seen best. You had the storing period, you finished on grass, and it was the most efficient. And in terms of specifications that were written by supermarkets, many of those are decades old at this stage. And as the debate on climate comes center stage, and it takes priority now, I would suggest, to an extent certainly that it never has before now, it's an area that has to be reopened. It's a debate that has to be reopened. Now, there are issues on the eating quality side, and maybe one of the things, and we talked earlier there just about the difficulties of 2013, 2014, and we also, I know Adam touched on specifications earlier there as well. That's another key point. But I think if we're having this debate, we need to be ready to have a debate on producing young bulls to a very tight specification. That's an age specification and weight specification. And I think if we're guilty of anything in the past, and if we're guilty of one thing in this country, and you look at the price comparisons with other countries, we tend to move towards the middle, the flat rate. You know, the grid is in place now just a little over a decade, and there's a danger that we lapse out of that again. It took us a long time to get there. And, you know, bull beef production has to be the way of the future in terms of addressing the issue of emissions, full stop. But it's not something that we can just jump into ad hoc, willy-nilly. It has to be done in a very planned and structured way with the meat processing industry on board for it, because there is no option with bulls that are ready for slaughter of sending them anywhere else.
But Phelim, look, you talk about meat eating quality, but I think it would be fair to say that a lot of the research, okay, the factories will argue about meat eating quality, but at the same time, a lot of the Chagas research would show very, very marginal differences in terms of that meat eating quality.
Yes, and the other thing too, Justin, there is age. Like, you cannot let the young bulls run on forever, essentially, and put more weight on them. The other thing that's a big problem with factories and supermarkets is actually getting, and Adam talked about the polystyrene trade earlier there. Look, that's a reality of life. Any of us that want to wander around any supermarket in this country or in our next door neighbor, or indeed anywhere, you see virtually all meat now is sold in polystyrene trays.
But Phelim, why did my man get top dollar then today for 550 kilo steers? Then what if that is the case? Why not reward that guy that's killing that animal at 380 kilos and give him a massive price this week because he's hitting that spec? But the guy that's at the 500, and I'm not trying to take away from that. That more luck to the man today that got the top dollar for the 550
right,
kilo
Adam,
animal.
you're right.
But we'll go back to this in 12 months' time now, or 2 years' time, and we'll say we'll roll out the polystyrene tray again, and we'll roll out that stainless steel, and we'll say this is where it has to be, boys. You're going nowhere with the 550 kilo steer. But today I can go anywhere with a 550 kilo steer.
And Adam, today, look at the prices that have been paid elsewhere in Europe and around the world for beef, and look at where Ireland's place in that table is. We're down in the relegation zone. And the reason that we're in the relegation zone is that we pay, and we're taking it everything. And the guy that gets a real good price today on something that is that won't fit that polystyrene tray that we talk about there, that there is being paid for by the person that has the real good animal that's perfectly in spec for every market that's out there. They're getting paid less than they should be, so that other one gets a bit more. You mentioned earlier there about
hold on now. I can't let you away with that statement. So if I look across Europe today, and if you want to put up, do you want to put up your, actually just maybe in terms of the prices there, give you a bit of breathing space there to get your thoughts together.
Yes.
Put up your.
Yeah, I've pulled that graph out there. Just if we can just have it brought up on the screen there.
Screen there, guys, in terms of what's happening across Europe. Now, remember the prices here, guys, we're looking at are either hormone driven in the US, they're either or bull beef driven across many of the other countries. So we're
across them all, apart from the north and Britain. They're the only steer prices that are in that graph.
We don't have access, obviously, to growth hormones, and we don't have access to bull beef systems. So we're effectively a less efficient steer beef system that Adam talked about. And let's look at where our price is, Phil.
And you can add the VAT to that 430 get there, because all those price comparisons that are done across the European Union, the UK, they're all done net of VAT. So if you add VAT to the Irish price there, we're still at the bottom of the heap. If you look at it there, countries like Poland, for example, never known as a major beef buying country, they're way ahead of us and have been now for several months at this stage. That happened at the end of last year. The continental market is going really well at the minute. It's actually stronger than UK market.
And Germany, Phil, there, which is traditionally a dairy beef market.
Sorry, Justin?
Germany, which is traditionally
it's actually so high it went off the scale today. We couldn't get the number in on top of it as we went to print this evening. $5.11 a kilo is the price in Germany at the minute for an R3 young bull. So that, and to come back to Adam's point and come back in the specification here, we talked about foil. Adam, you talked about foil earlier there. Foil would be one of the tighter factories in the country when it comes to enforcing specification, and some of the fanciest prices they have is on quite a narrow weight range, quite a narrow age range, and that's the road they go down. And I would argue, if we want to maximize the value of Irish beef per se, then it's best done in specifications. But whenever there's a pressure comes on factories in this country to get cattle, and they're going well out there, and the factories are flying it at the minute. They have to be with those prices that's been paid in the markets that we're selling our beef in. We tend to drop specifications. We take whatever comes at us, and we reflect it in the overall basket of a price that's paid.
Phil, giving farmers, I suppose, a bit of confidence and maybe a bit of force, are looking ahead to the future a little bit. When you see Brazilian beef prices at €3.90 a kilo, nearly €4 a kilo. I remember having trips Brazil, and it was down around 155, 170 a kilo, a euro equivalent for their beef price at that time. Like, fundamentally, global beef markets are strong. And secondly, Europe is no longer an outlier in terms of paying premium beef prices. Like the US, Brazil, Australia, all them, certainly Australia and the US, going toe to toe now with Europe in beef price. That is a fundamental shift in global markets.
Yeah, and if you looked at it just now, I don't have the figures to hand, but I looked at them there a couple of weeks ago in terms of when the figures for 2021 were released, the value of the sales and the kilos that both the US and Australia sold into, mainly the high value Asian markets. I'm thinking of Japan, I'm thinking of South Korea in particular there. When you look at what they secured out of those markets, it's higher than anything that we're seeing now. That's no doubt loaded heavily towards the steak meat, the higher value cuts. But the other thing that they're selling there, it is, as you say, the hormone-treated grain-fed beef product, and it is a very, very strong global beef market at the minute. And just the big driver market-wise, China is buying between 20 and 25% of all the beef that's traded in global markets at the minute, and that's thriving. That's what's keeping Brazil. I was just looking this week in the paper, in terms of the graph of the week. Brazil sent less than 100,000 tons of beef to Europe last year, to the European Union. Back at the time you were there, 2005, they were sending 400,000 tons to Europe. The market now has moved. The markets have moved, and again, we'll come back and we'll talk at the end of the presentation a little bit what we're looking at in the paper this week. The markets have moved from Europe and indeed the Americas to the Asian market, China in particular. So that's what's going to drive us over the next decade, and it's why our price at the minute, we look at it and we're relatively happy, only happy compared to where we were last year, but we are not any big shakes when we compare ourselves internationally.
You just, can you understand though, from a farmer's point of view, lads, in terms of looking at that table there in front of me and thinking Argentina, 424 for young bulls in Argentina, but 30 cents behind where we are today, and all the hoops that we jumped through on Tullamore Farm. And I'm a fan of Board B, and I'm a real fan of Origin Green and all that, but in terms of, are we really getting what we need to be getting out of that, in terms of jumping through all them hoops and the production standards that Irish farmers have to get up to versus what's going on in Argentina? And here we are, just 30. Is that all it's worth, is 30 cents?
Well, that's certainly where we are at the minute. And of course, you can never take 1 week's figures and look at them in isolation. That's why when I'm making a reference there to Poland, like this is a trend now that's been in place for at least a quarter. I'm talking about 10 or 12 weeks here, where we are way behind the pace when it comes to the rest of Europe. So I think this is a debate that needs to take place. And I think part of what's holding us back, you were talking, Adam, if I stuck up a comparison sheet on O3 cows there, you find that Ireland's probably leading Europe on it. And I think that we have an awful tendency in this country. We run 1 million miles from specification. And in fact, the specifications, if used properly and correctly and thought out in a joined up way, they can be the farmer's friend.
Hold on a minute. What specification has a Polish farmer got to get that price?
No, look, I'm not defending that at the minute, Justin, but what I'm saying is and you're right. Like, and the thing is, the beef market in mainland Europe at the minute is flying it. Now, are we locked into contracts in the UK that we have to stay with? We certainly heard, and I would defend the difficulties that are in the meat processing side and the beef processing side any day of the week. But certainly we would, I would buy into the story that the red tractor branding in the UK is worth good money to them. It's worth an edge to them. But what seems at the minute is there's a deficit supply in the UK. So we seem to be the overflow for that, as they went out last year and they were very quickly back in again. So I think that we're in a position now that we are topping up the UK supply base on a second-rate price, and we're missing the opportunities that are in mainland European markets.
William, looking ahead, guys with cattle in the shed, guys looking ahead, say, to grass cattle coming early, getting cattle out early. Hopefully the weather will improve, and early grass cattle in June and July. I won't ask you to go beyond July, but you don't see anything on the global horizon there that would suggest any major softening in beef prices.
No, there's internationally, the beef supplies are tight everywhere and markets are good. Now, of course, we're in a time of great uncertainty at the minute, so things can change. But if we're taking a view for the first half of the year and looking, and I suppose something that I use to kind of guide my thinking on the weeks and months ahead, the American futures, the US futures market are ahead of where the current market is in the States at present. That's on an index basis, and I don't know the number on the top of my head, but it is significantly ahead of where it is now, and it's projected to stay ahead up until about July time, and then it falls back again in the second half of the year. And I know Adam touched on it earlier there too. The UK supply situation is expected to loosen up a little bit the second half of the year. So, in terms of up to June, it looks like it'll be a seller's market. After that, then it's much less certain.
Much less certain, but nothing to show, Phelim, where the underlying floor of international markets is to suggest that even if more cattle did come on stream, you would see a major correction back. It might be a bit of a softening, but it would still be you would still forecast a strong market.
Well, in present circumstances now, in terms of, and I don't want to get into the doom and gloom business, but look, consumer inflation is a problem across the world at the moment. It's a bigger problem in the States than it is here. It's a problem in Europe, in the EU zone. It's a problem in the sterling area. So, as that bites on consumers, at the end of the day, beef in particular, it is a discretionary spend. So that is something that could put pressure on that end later in the year. Hopefully not, but it's just something that I would have in the back of my mind.
The only thing, I would share that view, Phelim, the only thing I would say is when you see Glanbia coming out today, as we report in the Journal tomorrow, with record forward pricing for wheat, and you would indicate, it would signify there's not going to be a lot of cheap pork and a lot of cheap chicken around to substitute to trade down the protein pyramid. I know what you're saying, that there will be pressure come on, but when you see high grain prices, and I remember writing a very controversial article saying high grain prices were good for Irish farmers, but I still think that fundamentally rings true, because we are producing a product that's competing across the world with grain-based, grain-finished cattle, as Adam talked about, and also then we're competing with pig meat and poultry on the retail shelf as well. So that pushes all of that up. Phelim, just before we leave this, I want to come and just touch on China in relation to beef access to China. Are we ever going to get beef access back to China when Ireland has a seat in the UN Security Council?
It's starting to look that we won't, Justin. And I know the minister has been asked about this several times, and he's been very non-committal on it. Everything that the Irish government, the Irish Department of Agriculture can do has been done, but it's very striking. We go back to September last year. Brazil found themselves in the same position as Ireland. They discovered two atypical cases of BSE within a short time of other. They suspended exports. They expected that they'd be back in the market again in a couple of weeks, like they had been before a couple of years ago, but they weren't. They were out of the market actually from the second week of September until the middle of December. But they were reinstated at that point. And I would have thought if we were ever going to get access, Justin, it would have to have been around that time. I was hopeful when I seen the Brazilian situation and knowing that China's demand for beef, Brazil is the one country that is in a position to meet a big chunk of their needs. I thought when they got through the door again, then that was the door open for us and we would walk in behind them. That is now middle of December and we're now coming up to the end of February. It hasn't happened so far. I can't see what's going to change in the immediate future. There's going to get us in there, and all of the indications are that that it has to be for political reasons at this stage, because there's certainly no technical reasons or questions that have been left unanswered.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Phelim and the guys will be staying with us, and we'll be joined by Anne shortly in terms of to discuss, I suppose, the impact of, Phelim mentioned uncertainty. Certainly we are in a period of huge uncertainty with the political instability, or with the conflict that's surging in Ukraine and Russia, and we're going to come back and look at the impact of that. In the meantime, guys, we would really appreciate your questions, answers, comments, webinar@farmersjournal.ie or on WhatsApp 086 836 6465. And just before I go to Anne, we're going to take a short break, and as I say, to talk about the implications that a potential war in Ukraine could have on farmers.
Hi, my name is Stephen Cohen. I'm from Lehin, Mountain, County Mayo. I farm here with my father and my brother. We run a beef and sheep enterprise, 120 ewes and maybe 15 to 20 cows. I really enjoy it out here. It's a nice countryside. Football career, I suppose I play with my club here, Hollymount Carramore. Lucky enough to play with my County Mayo and play with my university as well, UCD. So busy football all year round, but love playing it. So don't see it as a chore, so really enjoy it. In any of them teams that we were successful in, everyone had a high standard. There's a high standard amongst the group, a good culture, and it's no different here at home. My brother and my father will be very ambitious and want to get the most out of what we have. I suppose we were all interested in agriculture, and I suppose we make things easy for ourselves there as much as possible because we're all away from the farm. So as I mentioned before, we breed pedigree texel rams for the local commercial breeders here. I suppose we'd sell 35 to 40 rams a year. They're very important to us, no more than our Wainlands or our commercial lambs for the factory as well. So, and there's no doubt about it, we do run good grass system, but we give them creep as well. But there's no point giving them creep if they're going to be fighting disease, and we just need to prevent that as much as possible. So I suppose that's why using the likes of Chanel products is ideal for us, in that we can control that, prevent it, and then we're not wasting our food, which our creep and our meal, which is costly. I suppose it's like anything in sport or in competition. If something's going wrong, you just need to be able to adapt and change that. And I suppose on the farm here it's no different. Take for example, if we've too much grass come the summer, we take out paddocks for silage, and it's the same with the health plan. If there's a disease on spread or something like that, we have to just dose and vaccinate and be ready for it. I think we're ahead of the curve in kind of being adaptive and being ahead of the game.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for that, and thanks very much to Chanel Animal Health and AXA Farm Insurance for supporting us in this. Have we Anne on?
Yeah. Hello,
Hi,
Justin.
Anne,
how are you? Good.
And who would have thought that we would be, I suppose, sitting here talking about, I suppose, the conflict and the potential of what people are describing as World War III. And I suppose maybe just standing back from, I suppose, the personal impacts of that and the humane challenges, I suppose if we concentrate on maybe what the impact of that it would have on food supplies and ultimately on farmers here in Ireland that will be tuning into our webinar here tonight, maybe give us a helicopter view of where you see it.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the first things I'd say is it's probably striking that we're only discussing Russia's dominance in food and agriculture, in energy now and in the past 6 months, you know, when the problem is on our doorstep. And I suppose, look, what do we all know of Russia? We know that its economy is a commodity powerhouse. In terms of its dominance and the region's dominance in agriculture, it has a significant impact on global agricultural markets. The Ukraine and Russia taken together account for about a third of global wheat exports, a third of global barley exports, and 20% of corn. And Russia, as we know, is the leading fertilizer export in the world and across all of the main nutrients. So it's a quarter of global nitrogen exports, it's 20% of potash, and almost 20% of phosphate. So in those terms, the direct impact on agriculture and the direct reliance that agriculture has on Russia and the Ukraine is huge. And I suppose then if you widen that out and look at the broader commodity impact, and we've written quite a lot over the past number of months about Europe's dependency on Russia for our energy. It's a huge oil and gas exporter, and it supplies 40% of EU gas, about 30% of EU's oil. So like indirectly the impact there in terms of all businesses, all consumers, but on agriculture again, be that on energy prices or on fertilizer production in Europe through gas prices. Natural gas is the main ingredient in nitrogen fertilizer and accounts for 80% of the cost. So ultimately the price of nitrogen tracks the price of gas. So there's huge interdependencies there with Russia. We rely greatly on them. And in fairness, on Russia's part, its economy relies, the performance of Russia's economy relies, I suppose, on those exports. And they also have a huge food import requirement in their own right. So really, I mean, I think the world is looking on at two significant players in global food. Who would have thought? It's unprecedented, I think, in any of our lifetimes, that they would be on the verge of war and trying to contemplate what impact that might have.
Just very interesting. We often make a big claim to feeding 40 million Europeans with Irish food exports. Ukraine has a population of 44 million people and actually produces enough food to feed 600 million people. And it's just a phenomenal situation to actually find ourselves in. And in terms of, okay, there may be a risk here in either in terms of European sanctions or indeed Russian manipulation, strategic manipulation of the fertilizer market, because ultimately when you control the price of nitrogen, you control the price and availability of food and very instantly do that. But leaving that aside, there could also be distribution difficulties around the Black Sea in terms of even if we can keep the crops growing and sort of in the Ukraine, as you talk about 30% of global wheat exports, mobilizing that 30% of global wheat exports to get them to the markets in which are needed could prove hugely difficult if a war does break out.
Yeah, there's a number of issues there, Justin, and I suppose first and foremost is the sanctions that the West will impose on Russia and have already started to impose on Russia. And I think, people were quite surprised and markets were quite surprised that Germany took such a hard line and halted the certification of this very controversial gas line that flows directly between Russia and Germany. Somebody said to me today, it's incredible that halting a gas line that isn't actually operational could have such an impact. And really, it's all about sentiment at the moment. So that has been a huge step by Germany. And really what that does is, yes, it's a direct message to Russia, but it's showing that Europe will put itself directly at stake as well, because ultimately we're in the firing line for these sanctions in pulling something like that. So I mean, it's very difficult to see, and we've seen what the United States have done and what the UK have done, and these kind of measures will continue in terms of targeting specific banks, specific enterprises, specific individuals who are allied to Vladimir Putin. You know, where it becomes really troublesome is if sanctions were imposed on you know, grain exporting business, fertilizer exporting businesses, it seems really unlikely that they would go down that route. But if they try to target the financial system and actually cut off Russia from trading with the world, eliminate them from the international payment system, then trade becomes very fraught, and trade in grain and trade in fertilizer becomes very challenged from the region. It's not going to be shuttered completely. And we saw last week President Bolsonaro from Brazil meeting with President Putin. All we saw was warmth. You know, there was a 20-foot table for Macron when he went to Moscow, handshakes for Bolsonaro, with a deal to double fertilizer exports. So there's very visible.
Also, Anne, a very important statement by Bolsonaro in that they I think was the word stand by or
solidarity.
Solidarity with Russia. That's the word I'm looking for. Phelim, maybe if we could just, you could, Anne, a breather, if we could jump in. What will Bolsonaro effectively shunning the US and Europe, what impact will that have on future trade deals? Because like Bolsonaro has very clearly hitched his wagon now to Russia. There are tariff-free deals being done in beef exports from Brazil into Russia as well. So Bolsonaro has made a very clear strategic alliance with Russia, obviously to protect the Brazilian fertilizer imports from Russia. But what will the long-term consequences be? Where does Mercosur sit in all of this now? Surely Europe has to take note.
Has to be a big question mark, Overton, when we talk of sanctions, and of course they're directed towards Russia very much at the moment, but it has to really, if Brazil are able to secure a supply of fertilizer that European farmers can't secure, then it certainly doesn't make much sense that a Mercosur trade deal, now it hasn't been ratified yet and there has been big question marks over it anyway, but it pulls into question, I think, and it's something that we will be digging into a bit more, it pulls into question trade policy of other countries in relation to Brazil. Well, like UK is out chasing trade deals everywhere. Like South America, Mercosur is one that will be targeted for them. It was one of the countries that was named by Theresa May many years ago at this stage now, in a famous speech that she made just in terms of what Brexit would mean the UK doing. It was one of the countries that were targeted. But you make a very good point there. I don't know how the European Union can credibly ask its member states to endorse a trade deal where the key trader in it, the key participant in the Mercosur group of countries, is Brazil, biggest exporter to Europe. Brazil are currently the #1 supplier of imports across all products to the European Union, replacing the UK since Brexit came into effect at the start of last year. So that is something that certainly has to be on the agenda in the coming weeks.
And where do you see all this playing out if we were to do, and I know it's a difficult question to ask you, if we were asked you to do a little crystal ball gazing, what do you see the short term, and maybe by I mean short term weeks and maybe longer term months as far as we can go, what do you see playing out?
I think short term, we're just going to see an awful lot of volatility in markets. We're seeing that in energy at the moment. Gas is up. Oil is hit nearly $100 a barrel this week, first time since 2014. That's going to continue.
Ironically, on this time 2 years ago, you were getting paid to store oil.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, we're going to see it waxing and waning, the volatility. You know, and interestingly, talking to somebody today, they were talking about the opportunistic selling that's happening out of the Black Sea at the moment, in advance of, you know, some form of shuttering or some curtailment of the trade in the Black Sea. So, you know, it's hard to tell. The fertilizer industry are hugely concerned about availability of product as we go into late spring and summer. There's no obstacles in the market at the moment. So, you know, there's a lot of speculation and a lot of anticipation as to what can happen. Ultimately, if fertilizer is constrained, and Phelim talked about, you know, inflation and global inflation already, and across the world, we're seeing energy and food prices driving that. Any curtailment in the availability of fertilizer is going to curtail. It's going to curtail food, and it's going to drive the price of food even further. So, you know,
and Ireland is very exposed to that too, because just reading your piece on the agribusiness pages in this week's Farmers Journal, the 25% of all imports from Ireland or from Russia into Ireland were actually fertilizer.
Fertilizer, exactly, yeah. And that, I mean, the extent of our fertilizer imports from Russia will, I imagine, you know, peak and trough. It'll vary through the years, but it's a significant. It has to be a significant market for us, and I think I understand it's a really significant market for cans. So. So absolutely, that's a supply line. But I mean, you know, the fertilizer, even the deal with Brazil, and there will be other deals. Look, there's huge warmth between Russia and China. They're after signing a long-term agreement on gas supply. A lot
China
of our
still got their fertilizer, their ban on the fertilizer exports in place, and they have, haven't they?
They have, yeah. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out and what they do when that comes to an end. I think we're looking at April time. So so look, you know, we could be looking at a shortage of supply. At the moment, there isn't any there. It's interesting, the one market that the volatility hasn't played into this week is fertilizer. It's remained relatively steady. And I think the fertilizer market has probably, talking to the analysts who know and watch that market well, it's probably been quite sluggish since the start of the new year, because prices have been falling in the European and the international wholesale markets, and buyers have stood back to let it find a level. So it hasn't been so affected. That's not to say that it won't be. And you know, we're at the tip of the iceberg, really. It's what comes next in terms of the escalation of conflict, and how the West responds in terms of sanctions, and how difficult that makes trade, you know.
I think one of the key things here, guys, has to be, if I stand back and listen, and it's that volatility, uncertainty around what is a key ingredient in farming, which is nitrogen. And I think, okay, there's going to be market volatility and there's going to be ups and downs, but trying to bet the market on such a key ingredient, like I think the advice of what I would give, and reading into what you're saying, is that the farmers need to be looking and maybe moving now earlier than maybe some normally would, to try and secure at least a proportion and de-risk their business from this potential disruption. Because what we don't want to get, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a threat that could happen, that there could be a shortage of nitrogen availability in that April, late March, April, May period. And okay, there might not be, and actually nitrogen might fall a little bit. Well, if that's a risk you're prepared to take, but that is a big bet for your business. And maybe the consideration here is to de-risk that, and de-risk some of the bet by saying, I'm going to buy a portion of and secure my nitrogen now early. And I think that's a key one. And look, no doubt, and you have a very extensive coverage of this tomorrow, of the Bolsonaro visit, in terms of the fertilizer exposure, in terms of the potential implications on the Ag Biz pages. We look forward to reading that, and no doubt you'll be keeping us up to date on this evolving situation, both on farmersjournal.ie and in the print. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. Phelim, you stay there. You're going nowhere. There's a load of questions in here on cattle specs that you better address. So okay. Thanks very much, Anne. And has Adam gone home? Or has he gone to sleep? Or has he gone to get his polystyrene tray back out again there?
No, I'm here, ready for them. Go on.
Ready for what do you call it?
Shoot.
Thanks very much to Anne for that. And again, guys, we are in very uncertain times, and that's not our focus on markets was not obviously to take away from I suppose the humanitarian stresses that there will be if we go down this unfortunate road, and hopefully diplomatic efforts will continue to make sure that we don't. But I think we have to plan ahead for the situation that indeed may arise. Adam, I have a few questions here for you. What is the optimal mix for under 16-month bulls in the last 70 to 80 days of fattening? Or Declan, if you want to come in and take that, if you wish.
Yeah, I think Declan can come in maybe, and maybe he'll correct me on this, but I think we're around about 35 maize, 35 barley, a little bit of soya, maybe a little bit of distillers, beet pulps, generally safe in there for a bit of fibre or whatever, and molasses, and we've a rumi boost, sort of a balancer in Tullamore as well, and balance for minerals as well. But that's roughly sort of, look at it, it's going to be cereal. Cereal's going to drive weight in that last 70, 80 days, and we're working on 70% cereals there. And that, Declan, I don't know.
Yeah, no, Exactly, Adam, and just I suppose a lot of other 16-month systems are probably in that transition currently from your 16-month win and ration onto your say 12% protein finishing ration. It's just managing that transition will be important too, because any change in the diet can cause upset. So I would say that you're gently easing out that 16% and easing in the 12% over a week, 10 days. It's not all happening at one go, but definitely then for your finishing ration, high cereals like maize, barley, they're going to be your key drivers in that. Simple three-way mixes, I would say, go for it. No need for anything fancy. Simple three-way mixes are way to go.
Guys, why has more not been done to get live cattle into the UK?
Yeah, sure. So that goes back to that. Maybe Phelim will come in here, but that's going back to that red tractor label, and in terms of, I suppose, getting into that supermarket spec in England, we've seen a move away from that because northern cattle are obviously were filling the hole. So what's happened, and Phelim can correct me on this as well as regards international trade, but my understanding is that we'll say the Northern Ireland in spec animals are heading across the water to fill that sort of, we'll say, supermarket trade. That's leaving a hole in the Northern Ireland wholesale market, and we're able to fill that hole with sort of, I'll call them out of spec. They're not out of spec, but we'll say maybe heavier cattle and maybe young cows, we'll say, heading north. But, oh yeah, look, we've seen some of those buyers in Elfin in the past, Justin, really lighten the likes of Elfin up and Marts in the west as regards being able to pay, because of that price differential that we're working with, being able to pay a lot of money for those animals. And look, you'd love to see that more, but at the moment, legislation, I guess, and look at that red tractor label is placing a barrier in its place.
I think, Adam, and I agree with everything you said there, but I think another factor that we'll have to recognise as well, that the major meat processors in the Republic of Ireland are also the main meat processors in the north, and they're the main meat processors in Britain now as well. We're thinking of ABP, Kepac, and Dawn through Dumbia. Well, look, and you can see how a group like with their own buying policy that they will look to source cattle within the catchment area of their own factories, and they'll look to steer supplies to that direction. I think that's again efficient management from a procurement point of view. But the reality is we don't, and we think back to a golden age, maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago when there would have been a big trade to Britain. The reality then is that it was a totally different processing industry. There's a lot more of independent players in it, and it's a totally changed world. And I think that's part of it.
I've lots of questions here, and I'm conscious of time. You sort of pin your colours to the mast now here, Aaron. He says, if a factory agent walks into my yard next week looking for 30 fit O+ and R grading heifers, 330 kilos dead, and 30 R grading bullocks at 350 kilos dead, selling at a flat price, what should he ask for?
He didn't put in the breed.
Doesn't matter. They're going to a factory, Adam.
Well, assume they're not Angus.
If they were Angus or Hereford.
O+Rs. So assume they're
well, look, those are ideal. Those are ideal supermarket specifications, Adam. So
hey guys,
they're top dollar.
The way the thing is, hold on. You asked me a question. The way the thing is moving on, I'd be going €5 if they were Hereford or Angus cattle, and maybe a little bit. I know they're O+, but the way the thing is moving on, or equals cattle is hitting that this week. I'd be coming in at 480, 490, and I'd be pushing for 5, maybe, or even 510, maybe for Angus. And I'd say that those cattle aren't going to, unless those cattle are going to go, we'll say, over fat. I'd say the thing is going to improve week on week for the next couple of weeks.
Aaron, I can hear the factory agent telling you, and I will tell Adam Woods to buy them off you. That's usually the line that they give back, but I think it's solid advice, and we'd be delighted to know how you get on if that situation does arrive. I'm just going to take one more question here before we go back in, and we can come back to some other questions, guys. Martin McNamara, I just presume that's maybe Martin from down in Ennis. We hear about extra 80,000 cattle in the system, but how much more beef will actually be available given the extra percentage of dairy cross cattle and obviously at lighter carcasses? I believe we should be talking about kilos of beef, not heads anymore. It's a very valid point.
Absolutely. I suppose if we go back 10 years ago, Justin, 60% of our cattle was coming from the suckler herd, 40% from the dairy herd. That has just flipped completely on its head in the last 10 years. It's 60 from the dairy herd and 40 from the suckler herd. Now, I just pulled up the carcass weights for last year based on 2020, and we're back 3.3 kilos on steers, 6.2 on young bulls, 4.2 on heifers, and 4.4 on cows. If you call that 5 kilos, Justin, right, and you multiply it out by 1.8 million animals, and that gives you, I think, is it 900,000 kilos of beef or something. Divide that out out then by 320 kilos or 30 kilos of an average carcass weight. It's about 26,000 animals in terms of that, what that reduction in carcass weight from 2021 to 2020, what it has done. And I guess we'll see another effect of that in 2022 in terms of reducing more.
And if we're looking at higher feed costs, both in terms of meal and we're looking at higher fertilizer costs, there's going to be maybe an awful lot less of both used, and that actually could cause those to drop a few more kilos for the kill this year.
That's a good point, guys. Moving them earlier, Phelim, in terms of high feed prices. There should certainly be a hell of a lot less 4+ cattle killed this year than years gone by. That's a very good point, guys. I'm just going to throw this one in before we go. I know I said it the last one. But this is from Ronan. I think I can identify Ronan here from the system. I want to buy cattle now to fill a shed emptying out after Yo's lambing and finish these cattle out of the shed. I have lots of silage, lots of hay. What should I buy? Should I buy a mixture of bullocks, steers, or heifers, or dairy beef? Where's the value? What's the simplest ration? Adam, I know that Ron will definitely come back to you if you get this one wrong, so you better get your cattle on here.
Ironically, lots of silage and hay. That could be the best punt of all in terms of for next spring, in terms of holding on to that rather than spreading it at €900 a ton to try and cut another crop of silage. But anyway, he's going to buy cattle. I know him, and he will buy them. I think, right, if you wanted to de-risk a system and you wanted to take no gamble at all, bullocks and heifers are always going to be up there as number one, because they're always going to be said number one choice for a factory. But if I was a gambling man, which I amn't, but if I was, I'd actually be looking at cull cows there, I think. Because we talked about this, Justin, in terms of food inflation and people maybe moving back to maybe possibly cheaper cuts of beef, maybe moving back to mince. And those cull cows could come out very strong in the next couple of months. And they're probably value at the moment in terms of some of those cows, in terms of being offloaded in marts. I'd definitely put a share of them in, I think, and I'd take a punt on some of them.
But no, he's looking to fill a shed. I would agree with you, Adam, if he was going out early to grass and knowing the run, I think it is, he would be farming on dry land. But did you put cull cows into a shed to feed them?
I don't know. I'd love to try some of them at the minute at what they're making in the mart and what cull cows can do when they go onto that good diet. I'd take a chance. I think I'd take a chance on them. But look, it's going to be. I
think our friend Ronan would have a bit of selling power too if he's.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stop trying to guess who Ronan is. Declan, coming back to you. Look, we've all talked about, and Jesus, anybody listening to this would think that beef farmers will be wondering what to do with the money. But obviously costs are rising. There's a lot of risk in the system now as well, because you're dealing with a lot more money in terms of turning through your hands. Take it through the economics, what's happening here and what's happening in margin, because ultimately all this comes down to what's left in your pocket at the end of the day.
Yeah, Justin, so I suppose we often go through a winter finishing budget in the months of October, November, and we say what we need in spring, but sometimes we don't come back and look at what was actually achieved. So I've gone through, so I've taken, say, buying in a 530 kilo bullock in the 1st of October in autumn 2020 and autumn 2021 just passed. So taken from the MarketBids database. So I've looked at the MarketBids database for each of these for the corresponding week. So we're taken from the top third of cattle, 500, 600 kilos. So we're 234 a kilo in 2020. In the first week of October was the average price there, and 257 a kilo in 2021. So it just shows the difference between 2 years as well. So that gives us of a 530 kilo bullock, give us the purchase price of 1240 in 2020 and 1362 last autumn. Then silage, I've kept the same in both systems, €165. It's just shy of 6 ton going in at €28 a ton over the 165-day winter finishing period. The meal, so in winter 2020 coming into 21, I have it in at €250 a ton. I have it in at 310 a ton for this current winter. Look, it's higher currently, but a lot of people in the system will have, bought into or signed into an agreement last November that they will be on something between 300 and 310, I would imagine, up until the end of March. These typically run on. So there comes out a €50 per head difference in meal costs there. Across 5 kilos per head per day, so it comes out to 825 kilos being fed. So vet costs have left the same. Look, you could argue they're up slightly, but I think €10 per head is probably still adequate in that system. There isn't a huge amount of vet costs in there. Transport and marketing, I've upped slightly again, just mostly on the transport costs, so 49 up to 56, giving us a total variable cost from 430 in spring of 21 to 487 in spring of this year. Then I put in, say you're borrowing half the capital investment at 6.5%. So again, because your higher purchase price last autumn, it's slightly up as well, giving you a total cost of 470 for the previous year and 531 to bring an animal through this spring. So if you add in our purchase cost, that gives a total cost of 1710 last year, 1893 on an animal coming up for slaughter this March. Again, the live weight gain that I've assumed in these animals, 1.2 kilos per day for every day they're on farm. You might say that's low and we're buying the top third of animals, but again, if you take it from the day that they're purchased or what you pay for in a mart to the day they're going out the gate, I think you probably won't be far off at 1.2. Then, so that's our costs here again at the top, 1710 and 1893. So we're going to slaughter them on the 15th of March. So at our live weight at 1.2 kilos a day all the way through brings us to 728 kilos heading for the factory. We're going to kill them out at 55.5%. So these are, again, I'm saying top third animals, and they're going to be graded as a U minus 3 equals. So we're coming at a carcass weight of 404 kilos on both sides. So our break-even price for last spring came in at €4.23 per kilo. Our break-even price this spring is €4.69. Then just to include €150 margin over our purchase and feed costs, because obviously there's a lot more costs in the system just compared to purchase price and feed costs. So 461. And sometimes we do this on €100 per head margin, but I think with increased costs this year, this margin that we're looking for needs to increase too to cover all those. So 461 we needed last spring. We need 506 this year to leave the same €150 margin. So then I looked at the beef price on the 15th of the 3rd last year. So we had a base price for bullocks was €3.80. Added in your 20-cent inspect bonus and your 12-cent on the grid for a U minus animal. That brought the beef price last year to €4.12 paid. And I put in the highest, or kind of a good quote this week, maybe 450 of a base for steers. Add in your 20 and your 12 as well, bringing you 482 a kilo. So if you divide your cost by your beef price paid, last year you were down €46, and assuming the same beef price, but hopefully, this will even improve, that you're €55 in the black this year. So, we are running well ahead on beef price, which is going to help.
It's important to say there that 150 margin over feed, that's not a margin as such. It's a cost over feed, isn't it? It's not a margin. I can see the questions coming in there already. That's not a margin as such. It's just that's to cover fixed costs and things like that.
Exactly. Sorry, it should be in that. So I've only variable costs in there. So this is all your overheads. You're running your tractors. You're actually delivering this feed to the animals. Your light, your power, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of to cover that kind of cost.
Mm-hmm. Plus, go back to that first slide, Declan. There, I was just looking there in tomorrow's paper. That bullock at 530 kilos. We say if a fellow was in a system where he's replacing them again, that bullock at 530 kilos today is up at 290 a kilo in terms of that store price. Like that store animal market is on fire at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, Adam, there's a question in from Tomas. When is €3 a kilo the average market price in Ireland? Are you visiting any marts in the south of the country? So Tomas reckons you're puffing up the trade there, Adam.
Yeah. No, well, look, I suppose there's 3 categories of stock in our MapBiz database, and if I look here at sort of steers in that, you're sort of probably €2, maybe around that bottom third, sort of around that 240 for the average, but you're definitely up at across those 4 weight categories in the bullocks in the top third, 293 for 350 to 400, 287 for 4 to 500, 291 for 5 to 600, and 293 for 600 plus. That's where we are for this week.
And I think that's important, Adam, because when we quote MartBids, these are actual prices paid for actual cattle. It's not rounded figures. It's an interactive database of cattle that are sold through marts over.
Yeah, look, with the best respect in the world, you ring a mart manager and a mart manager will tell you some of the best prices that happen in that mart, but we get all the marts will say prices through that database, so farmers can look at that with confidence as regards what's cattle making this week.
So Declan, I'm conscious of the title of our event tonight in terms of to finish or feed on. What's the advice? So a farmer listening here tonight, what advice are we giving them?
Well, I guess for a lot of cases, it's too little too late to change your you know, if you're up at 5 kilos a meal and pushing on, you're hardly going to turn them back out at this stage.
No, but say I had a 580 kilo steer there today, and he's on 2 kilos a meal. He's done what, 0.4, 0.5 over the winter. I'm thinking fertilizer €900 a ton.
Fill the meal bin. Fill the meal bin.
That doesn't sound to be based on a lot of science, Adam, if you don't mind me saying, or economics.
No, if you good quality silage, all the better. But I'd be pushing him on, and I'd be getting him out now. Yeah, absolutely.
That way, probably yes. Yeah, you know, but if you're 20 kilos further back or 30 kilos further back, it would depend. Again, if you don't have the stocking rate, or if you're highly stocked, then maybe actually selling that animal live currently would probably be your best option. But if you're not going to be severely stocked, then maybe going out with that animal again is an option. But if you're heavily stocked, I would be looking at, you know, those animals are a good trade in the market there at the moment. That might be as good as filling the meal bin.
Declan, Adam made one good point over the course of the evening in relation to silage and nitrogen. Like silage is nitrogen, hay is nitrogen. Like, I'm surprised that with nitrogen prices the way they are, you're not seeing more demand for guys buying forage. Now, I know there's a bit of a lucky bag element to buying brown beels and whatnot, but I think it just does need to be considered in terms of what forage in the pit is actually going to be worth this year. It's going to be worth a lot of money.
It's going to be huge, yeah. And you see that just in this very little fodder coming forward for sale. A lot of people, even with people with plenty of bales in the yard, they're sitting on them because they know this time next year there could be, you know, like gold dust. So it's definitely something we're going to focus on over the next few weeks. I was chatting with Kieran Maley earlier on, and you know, really hammering home the importance of securing enough silage this year and securing decent quality silage. Okay, it's going to cost you more to grow, but the extra costs in fertilizer compared to what we could be facing in ration prices next winter, that extra, you know, whatever it's going to cost you to grow your silage crop, it's only going to pay for a proportion of the meal it would take to replace that energy and eke silage reserves out.
I'd be really worried about the West. I'd be really, really worried. I said this earlier on in the spring, and I'm getting there's nothing to change my mind on this as regards what fertilizer is going to go out for silage and what silage pits are going to look like this time next year. I think that this is it's a disaster waiting to happen. I don't know, because any of the guys that you might buy silage off, we'll say they would have surplus bales, or the guys that are just tipping along and maybe making some silage, they're not going to have that silage next year. So yeah, we'll lot on the paper this week about fertilizer and slurry and silage.
I think that's a key message, Adam. If you're putting fertilizer onto the right soil, the right crop, and cutting it at the right time, even at the price it's probably still one of the best investments you'll make in your farm.
It is, but the sad reality is, on a lot of dry stock farms, we're in the situation where that fertilizer is bought on credit. It's maybe not paid for until maybe August or September, until payments start to come in, until weanlings are sold. Whereas this year, merchants, and rightly so, look at the demand and money up front, and we'd be huge.
This leads me on to a question we have here. Actually, just when you triggered my memory, and I intended to go to a break, but we'll hold. At the same time, as farmers are finding themselves in this position and possibly forcing them into a fodder situation next autumn, we have the minister clawing money back. We have a €100 million scheme that was announced that is only going to deliver about 58 to 60 million into farmers' pockets. We have farmers today having money clawed back out of their bank accounts in terms of a I'm not sure the best way to politely describe it, a shambolic beam scheme. Like, what's going on here, or what's happening, or where's that 40 million going to end up?
Sure, look at it. It's going to be money that's not spent by our own government. The full 50 million will be drew down from EU funds, and that's from the state. The Exchequer will get off the hook for that other 50 million that was associated with the funding for the scheme. It's an absolute disgrace to say that 40 million is going back. And you know what's even worse again, that nobody's jumping up and shouting about that as regards that 40 million going back into dry stock farmers. You've dry stock farmers in the west of Ireland that aren't going to be able to, would say, spend money. They haven't got money, Justin, to spend on fertilizer. Such is the economics of suckler and weanling production systems. That money is gone. BPS is gone. It's gone on paying bills, we'll say, in the last couple of months. And here we have a situation, and nobody is listening in relation to this, but we'll have a further disaster waiting just to happen next spring. And yeah, you're right, 40 million there that could go out to maybe subsidise or be some way as regards credit or something as regards buying fertilizer and putting fertilizer onto those farms. But no, there's nobody.
It should certainly be ring fenced for the sector. That it's there available in some, like, it wouldn't be beyond the the ambition of the minister to actually try to get that money back out onto farms through a different scheme. And look, we should be conscious as well. There are some farmers that will say, well, those farmers didn't comply with the scheme I did, why should they get it? That's a valid argument. But to lose that 40 million out of the low income sector in any argument is not valid. And I think what you're saying is fair. Guys, we've a few more questions in, and I'm going to come back to the guys, but we're just going to take a quick break, back in 60 seconds. Okay, guys, I have a good few more questions in here. I'm just going to go through them quite quickly. What are we going to do with all the imported feedstuffs? Surely we need Chagas to develop more domestic rations.
Yeah, just absolutely. I know there is some work going on with, if we take, I know maybe away from rations with red clover as regards going through that first winter, maybe with a red clover silage and reducing the ration requirement and really driving on that grass-fed beef. I think there's scope in that and there's potential in that. You'd love to maybe take the step further and maybe go out with our bulls then maybe for grazing for the second season and seeing what could we actually do a bull with as regards percentage ration in his lifetime. But yeah, I suppose Siobhan has been working a bit with us down on Tullamore Farm in relation to working in with beans and that. Probably will work for certain classes of stock, maybe won't work for all classes of stock. But yeah, there's potential there.
Okay. Does the consumer have any idea if they are eating bull, steer, heifer, or indeed cow beef, as I have never seen it identified on the packaging?
I'll take that one, Justin. No, they don't. It's not something that's promoted. It's a specification that's put out by the retailer. But look, if we do go into the and we're generalizing here, and I know with modern research and processing techniques, we can probably bring bulls at the right age with the right feed into that space. But the reality is, if we think of traditional butchers through the country, and there's still a good number of really good ones out there, they have a preference for getting, in most cases, actually heifer beef. And you know, that is how it is. So no, but the straight answer to the straight question is no, it's not on the label of any pack that you're lifting any retailer.
Phelim, I want to stay with you because you're probably one of the most interesting articles, and we have a jam-packed Farmers Journal actually tomorrow, but you're probably one of the most interesting articles I have seen in the paper for quite some time in relation to the UNFAO forecast for food demand. And on one hand, we hear all the focus is on re-wetting, all the focus is on taking land out of food production to do X, or the land that's in food production, reducing the level of productivity on it, going organic, whatnot. Are we living in a bubble? Because if I read your article correctly today, the FAO are forecasting an extra 4.3 million tons demand for beef by 2030, an extra 94 million tons of dairy, 2.2 million tons of sheep, 14 million tons of pig meat, 18 million tons of chicken. Like, are we holding our nose here and ignoring the reality? We're talking about lower production, and yet all the trends for consumer demand is increasing. How do we balance this?
That's right, Justin. This week I decided to follow up. Last week, if you recall, we went into the different assessments that have been done on the EU's farm to fork strategy. There's been 3 of them carried out, one by the USDA, one by Wageningen University, and one by the EU itself. And all of them had their own methodology in different ways, but the general common denominator of them all was that it was going to cost production volume following the farm to fork strategy and the Green Deal. So this week I decided they would do a bit of digging and looking the FAO and their outlook for 2030, what would be needed. And the figures you've just quoted there, Justin, that's the consumption figures. That's what the amount of extra product that's going to be consumed in 2030 compared with 2021. And the driver of this is coming. It's not going to come from Europe. Like the European and North American, even South American beef market for consumption, that's at best stable, if not indeed actually fallen slightly. But there is still serious growth to take place in Asian markets and indeed in African markets. And that's driven by a combination of greater wealth and rising population. Don't forget the world population is going to keep rising at least until 2050 is general thought. So the UNFAO, they've taken all of these factors, put them together, and that's what they have come up with. They're not our figures. They're the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations.
So Phil, Alan, that must be music to your ears in terms of beef demand. Global beef demand is going to keep rising. Where's this beef going to come from?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if you look at maybe European policy and even our own, we'll say, national policy as regards support to the suckler cow, is not going to come from Ireland. We're going to, we'll say, lose out on that one as regards reducing stocking rate in the West. And look at moving more to more environmental payments as regards stock payments. So yeah, a little bit frustrating, I guess, when you see that, and maybe seeing other countries like Brazil ramping up their suckler herd to capitalise on that demand in the future.
Yeah, they're going to be killing an extra 10 million cattle by 2030, according to their own figures, a year. So that's just to put it in context. That demand's going to be met. And another thing that's particularly striking, and I'm just there's various. We only managed to scratch the surface of the report on the page this week, but someone that sticks in my memory that actually they're forecasting the FAO's forecasting that European production will drop by about 5% over the decade, but they're also forecasting, for example, US production will be up 6%. So this slack is going to be picked up somewhere. And the thing that's really aggravating, and Jack Kennedy was actually highlighting this to me as well, they've broken it down and done some analysis of it, in terms of where it's been done in the world. And this, I'm talking myself into here, doing it again and going a bit further on it next week, maybe, Justin. But, in terms of the number of dairy cows that's required in the European Union, in North America and in New Zealand, it's just a fraction of the numbers that are emitting methane compared to what is exists in the rest of the world to grow their production by a small amount. So we have the efficiencies there in terms of minimizing the emissions from the livestock per litre of milk and kilo of beef, and it's something that in the European Union we're walking away from. And given what you've been talking with Anne earlier, Justin, I was going to interrupt you at the time. I thought we're striking, we surely need to have a strategic rethink at this stage at policy level, both in Ireland and at the European Union level, where this time last year none of us were talking about fertilizer. This is a debate.
Or food security.
Or food security. And this is a debate and a policy issue that has to surely be revisited in light of what's gone on over recent days and weeks.
Are we going to see a CAP reform take place in 5-6 years' time that's going to refocus back on production?
Who knows, or a midterm review, even. Like the reality is the CAP, and it's something that we'll be taking a bit of a look, and we come up to the 60th birthday this year in July for the CAP. And don't forget, the CAP was a product of Europe being on the point, in some parts of Europe, the Netherlands in particular, being on the point of real hunger in the immediate aftermath of World War II in the 1940s. And it was no coincidence that the Dutch actually would held the Agriculture Commission position for the first 10 years of the CAP's existence, Commissioner Malchat. And that was the driver of it then. Look, none of us can start saying that we make policy on the basis of what happens over a period of time. But I think the reality is that we have jumped into this Green Deal. And this is not to go into the climate denying space and saying that farmers don't have to work to reduce emissions. We have to get the world's farmers reducing emissions. And that means dairy farmers in the less productive areas improving to the point, or else outsourcing it to the area that can do it.
But Phil, there's a very interesting report our colleague up in the north, David Wright, has this week this night last week we held up in Northern Ireland on climate change conference, and the contribution of Professor Miles Allen from the University of Oxford. Like, some real questions being asked as to how agriculture, and particularly livestock, ruminant-based agriculture, impact on the challenge of global warming has been measured.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and you know that's a whole space, and I think he wrapped his comments up something with along the lines that it's a lot easier to cut a cattle herd than it is to remove the carbon that's been emitted from a cement factory.
I think the genesis of his argument was, and this is, I suppose, one of the most eminent professors worldwide on climate. He was basically challenging the whole logic of CO2 equivalence, that when you wrap up short-lived gases with long-lived gases like carbon and nitrous oxide, which are long-lived, versus methane, which is a vast, I think it accounts for 66% of emissions from ruminant agriculture, that it overstates. And I think the nutshell of his argument is that, yes, we need to do everything in agriculture we can to reduce and eliminate carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, obviously land use changes and fertilizer, but we don't need to reduce biogenic methane because it's a short-lived gas. We need to stabilize it. And I think he said, what basically around what you're saying there is that a push to reduce biogenic methane in agriculture would be a bit like telling a coal-fired power station after it closes, then it then needs to take all the carbon that emitted into the atmosphere for the last 20 years back out. And this is a I suppose a body of science that's becoming, or that is now well established and well accepted within the scientific community around biogenic methane. It is a very potent greenhouse gas.
And if I can come in there, Justin, and it's something that, you know, a country with an even higher share of its emissions coming from agriculture than ourselves, New Zealand, they are actually taking very active steps in looking at separating out these two gases. So this is a debate that has to take place, because at the end of the day, the issue here is global warming and solving that problem. And it's not about taking the shortcuts or the lazy options, because we have to achieve and reduce global warming parallel to producing more product. And it's not a case of either or, it has to be both.
Adam, after your holidays, are you back writing in the paper this week?
Yeah, I have some. Justin, I write in the paper every week. Obviously, you don't read it every week. I have some advice on fertilizers, which just what we talked about there as regards fertilizer and fertilizer plans, and obviously beef trends and all the good stuff at the back. That's where all the good stuff is.
Declan, what are you? Give us a quick update there, Declan, on the Thrive Farm. Have you many calves bought this year yet?
Yeah, no calves bought yet. First calves hopefully are arriving in the next couple of days. Just waiting on calf price maybe to settle down slightly. Just calf price update in the paper this week. You know, a much better week for calf trade compared to last week. Storms kind of upset boats running, and it was a bad week overall. But things are looking much better this week. Boats back running. I think a lot of marts starting to weigh calves, and you're seeing, you know, some marts suggesting to farmers to leave the calves an extra week or so. You know, under 45, 50 kilos, very hard to move. So you're seeing maybe heavier calves come out, which can only be a good thing as well.
Okay, guys, that leads us into a nice segue to promote our webinar. Our next webinar takes place, our fourth webinar in the series of 7, takes place on Wednesday. Same place, same time, 8 o'clock on the 10th, Wednesday, the 10th of March.
It's actually the 9th of March. Sorry, that's a mistake on that. It's the 9th of March. Yeah.
Sorry, 9th of March. I hope your figures are accurate, more accurate when you come to discussing beef prices, Adam. We'll be talking about dairy calf to beef and the beef systems and getting it right when buying calves. And obviously, Declan will have a lot of data from the Thrive, our demonstration farm down in Tipperary, that's actively restocking with cows at the minute. We hope you can join us for that, guys, and many thanks to you for watching tonight again. To my own team, Adam, Declan, Phelim, and Anne earlier, and indeed the team behind the scenes, our Traction Media team behind the scenes for all their technical work, and of course our sponsors for this evening, Chanel Animal Health and AXA Farm Insurance, for helping this make this happen. Guys, until next time, stay safe. Busy time out there on farms, calving cows and lambing ewes, and no doubt more activity, hopefully, when things dry up back on the field. But always remember, you're the most valuable asset in the farm, and do everything you can to keep yourself safe. Guys, until next time, thank you very much. And we have another action-packed Farmers Journal for you tomorrow morning. Thank you.